It was not Buddhists who flew planes into the Twin Towers. It was not Hindus or Jews that blew up the London Underground buses a few years ago. And that simple fact has to be acknowledged if you're even going to start a dialogue. Now, what is happening, ladies and gentlemen, it's not a pantomime.
I'm a British female. I love this country and I give this country. Now you're calling me a problem. I don't think I am. I think you are. Second point is, as a Muslim female, okay, my parents might not let me go somewhere late at night because people are racist to me. They tell me to go back home and they hurt me. I got hit by 2 white guys and they laughed at me because I'm a Scafi, okay? Last point is to Mr. Fleming.
I'd like to make a comment on one of the cases that Petra made, which was about Ahmed Abu Taleb, a very distinguished public figure in Holland. What you failed to mention when you mentioned him as a great success story of the Netherlands, which I agree he is that after the murder of Theo van Gogh in 2004, he had to go under 24-hour protection because his name was found on a hit list for a radical cell nearby. We cannot simply take, Petra, the terrific success stories and ignore things like that. It is no small thing that a Muslim politician who speaks out should be targeted for assassination in his home country of the Netherlands.
There are many Muslims and
Thank you. Well, first of all, just to pick up on a couple of people, particularly women, who've said about the terrific things that Islam gives women in terms of rights. The first thing is, yes, in 7th century Arabia, some of this was progressive. In 21st century Britain, it is not. And you have to make that fundamental admission that the Quran is not a document for women's rights in Europe in 2010. It is not.
You're about to see Douglas Murray state true and unspoken side of Islam, leaving the various Muslims speechless during a heated argument about Muslims in Europe. He argues that British society certainly embraced the immigrants. However, the Muslims or the jihadists pose various potential threats to the country. Do you think Muslims are exploiting the tolerant nature of British society?
In a difficult situation. If you listen to what is said in the European countries, the perception is very bad. 75%, for example, French people are associating Islam with violence. The perception is that Islam is a problem and that Muslims are creating problems. They are not really perceived at home in Europe. Every single European society has its own debates, its own controversies around the Muslim presence. The first one is the way Europe is defining itself. The current discourse and the general discourse is that Muslims are not European citizens. We have millions of Muslims that are already Europeans. And this is the situation when we speak about Turkey, for example. It's as if we are speaking about people who are coming from outside, not acknowledging the fact that we already have Europeans that are Muslims in our country. Not only this, on the geographical dimension, it's as if when we speak about Europe, we speak about Western Europe. Eastern Europe is not there. The Muslims who are being Europeans for generations and centuries are not perceived as Europeans. The Bosnian people are not Europeans. It's as if because they are Muslims, they are less Europeans. Our politicians, very often they speak about their fellow citizens as if they don't know who are these new citizens who are Muslim and they are living with them. It's as if these new citizens are problematic because of their religion, but not citizens as to their status. And this is where we have this confusion. We speak about cultural and we Islamize the socio-economic problems. Muslims in our societies are facing unemployment, discrimination and racism, and it's not because they are Muslims, it's because they are facing class discrimination, segregation and wrong social policies. At the cultural level, it's as if the new visibility of the Muslims is just showing that they don't want to integrate. In fact, it's exactly the opposite. The opposite, they are visible. Millions are visible. It means that they are at home. So when you have mosques, when you have organizations, it's not because you don't want to integrate. It's exactly the opposite. You feel at home, you build your mosque, and even this, it's also a very important point in the reality. So it's the opposite. When it comes to food, curry and couscous, that's fine. When it comes to money, Islamic banking, that's fine. But when it comes to dresses, when it comes to color, when it comes to something which is different, it's not fine. So we are selective in our integration. Money and food, welcome. colors and dresses. No. So, last point, when it comes to the media, it's as if here we are only dealing with problems and we are dealing with these controversies every day. We are talking about violence, the minarets, the headscarves, all the problems, not talking about what is done at the grassroots level, the positive actions of the Muslims, the presence. Millions are silent and are constructive and contributing.
Tariq claims that Muslims are being heavily stereotyped, which is deeply affecting them in most aspects, such as work, social integration, and harmony. He also uses France as an example, where Islamic notions are deeply condemned. However, let us remember that stereotypes don't create themselves.
Reality of our country, and let me say something which is important. The Muslims are understanding the West and Europe much better than before. They are understanding and rediscovering their religion much better than before. And I would say, yes, I'm supporting this motion because today we are failing, but it's a question of time, because what I see at the grassroots level is much more positive than what is happening today in our political discourse, media coverage. Things are very important behind. This is what I call the silent revolution. But we need time, and it will be coming.
He also highlights the negative political discourse and media coverage of Islam that has been playing a crucial function in shaping opinions and perspectives on Islamic groups. Tariq patently disregarded the extremist actions and threats they pose to the country. Let us now see Douglas's argument on this.
That Europeans associate Islam with violence, there is some truth in that. There is also a very obvious reason for that, which is that Islam is associated with violence. It was not Buddhists who flew planes into the Twin Towers. It was not Hindus or Jews that blew up the London Underground in buses a few years ago. And that simple fact has to be acknowledged if you're even going to start a dialogue. Now, what is happening, ladies and gentlemen, it's not a pantomime. I'd argue that Europe has done not too badly, considering the circumstances. In the middle of the last century, there was an almost negligible Muslim presence in Europe. At the turn of the 21st, in Western Europe alone, there were 15 to 17 million Muslims. That's a very fast migration, ladies and gentlemen, one of the fastest in human history. And no society would find it easy to deal with that kind of migration. As it happens, European societies, Western European societies have, I think, dealt with this much better than some would. Certainly, Muslims coming to live in Britain and in Western Europe enjoy more rights and better rights, among them freedom of worship, than they do in any Islamic country in the earth here today. We do have a problem. We have a problem when the failures of Islam throughout the world, the failures of all Islamic societies, come here into Britain. Their intolerance of freedom of conscience, their intolerance of apostates, their intolerance of freedom of expression and freedom of speech, their intolerance of minorities, other religious minorities, sexual minorities, their intolerance of gays, their dislike and distrust of half of the population, women, and many, many other things. And the call, what's more, for a parallel legal system within Britain and European societies. This is monstrous. No other group behaves like this, asks for parallel laws. This is a fundamental problem, and it's one we're going to have to deal with. It's a problem between a society, Western Europe, that believes that laws are based on reason, and Islam that believes that they are based on revelation. Between these two ideas, I'm not sure there is very much compromise for Europe. It is not Europe that has let down its Muslims, but the Muslims of Europe that have let down Europe. This is not solely something which we have to say we can never reconcile. Of course we can reconcile this, but we need to be honest about it. We need to be frank about it, and we cannot avoid things just because they are unpleasant. And if there were one thing I would wish Muslims in Europe could learn today, as fast as possible, it would be this: that you have no right in this society not to be offended. You have no right to say that because you don't like something, you can commit violence, or you would like something to be stopped or censored. You have no right to have more hate laws, or hate crime laws, or hate speech laws, just to defend Islam. You have to realize, the Muslims of Europe have to realize, that a society in which even your deepest feelings can be trodden upon is the only society worth living in. And the sooner we can learn that, the sooner that Islam can learn that within Europe, the better. It is not Europe that has failed its Muslims. It is Islam that has failed Europe. I'd argue Islam has failed its Muslims. Thank you.
Douglas Murray precisely points out how British society has been tolerant to its immigrants, created laws to protect minority groups, eventually making them feel at home, and allowing them to exercise rights that they potentially cannot in any other Islamic countries. I fully agree with Douglas Murray on this one.
How Europe has dealt with this problem, and what you basically have alluded to in the 6 minutes that you had are that Muslims are a problem. And you're from the organisation called the Centre for Social Cohesion, and it's worrying that to have you talk about these things in this manner. What you are basically alluding to is that Muslims are external to Europe, and it's worrying that you see it that way, because then that means there is no chance of there being any solution to any problem, or Muslims being seen as a part of Europe and being seen as European citizens. Thank you.
Gentleman there.
He says that Muslims are often regarded as outsiders in the UK. However, his claim cannot be regarded as accurate, considering how Muslims are often supported by the left wing, which focuses on protecting civil liberties.
I'm a British female. I love this country and I give this country. Now you're calling me a problem. I don't think I am. I think you are. Second point is, as a Muslim female, okay, my parents might not let me go somewhere late at night because people are racist to me. They tell me to go back home and they hurt me. I got hit by 2 white guys and they laughed at me because I'm a Scafi, okay? Last point is to Mr. Fleming, about the point where you said about the religion, changing religion. Every person has the right to. No one says anything about that. But if you had a daughter or a son that wanted to become a Muslim, would you be happy about that? I don't think so.
No, of course it wouldn't bother me. I mean, I would hope that if somebody has access... Look, what Fleming and I are arguing for is that people have the right to access all of the kind of opinions, all of the knowledge that they can. That means, among other things, having, for instance, access to all of the criticism that should be written of the Quran and of Islam. And if they weigh up after knowing all of these things and having access to all of them that they would like to become Muslim, I don't have a problem with that.
Douglas Murray does not hold back. He clearly asserts that everyone can exercise the rights and follow the regulations legal in the country, which also includes practicing a religion of their choice.
Once again, I think that you are taking one story. And then it is, and many Muslims around the world and in the Netherlands were against that and attacked the small groups that were saying this. And this is the case today in Europe. The discourse that you have is helping to nurture this sense of alienation and not to let the Muslims feel that they are at home. And out of the questions that we got from here, people are saying, you are welcome here, and then in their own country. I'm sorry, I'm at home. I'm at home. What are you talking about? Don't talk about. So, talk to me. I'm sorry. Talk to us or talk to me as a fellow European and not as someone who is an outsider infiltrating the freedom of expression and using this. This is one. Let me finish.
Can I come back to it? No, I'm not saying you're not a European, but I would appreciate the following, which is that don't come to this hall and tell this hall that you're a European, and go to another and talk to an Islamic audience as Islamic brothers. Because that is what you have spent your career doing.
What's wrong?
Speaking through. Let me finish this. And Tarek comes here one day and says, we fellow Europeans, we all speak to each other as fellow Europeans. And another, he speaks to a Muslim audience and says, we as Muslims. Which is it, Tarek? Which is it?
I'm a Muslim.
You can't pretend you have two identities. You can't just say
you know what?
Can I say something?
But you are my...
Okay, you two, just a...
Murray obliterates Tariq by explaining the difference between why a Muslim might or might not feel at home residing in the UK. Muslims often set themselves religious boundaries that make them feel like outsiders, and this is not something intentionally done by the people in Western Europe or the UK, but solely by the Muslims.
This is something which does exercise a great deal of debate. The fact that a lot of people feel that you can't be a Muslim woman and enjoy certain freedoms. How do you address that?
No, I think that we have to acknowledge the fact that there are problems, but we also have to acknowledge the fact that things are evolving, that there is and there are Muslim women in Europe today who are leaders in the leadership and coming with new interpretation. When it comes, for example, something which is very simple about the headscarf. It's against Islam to impose it. It's against human rights to take it off. This should be the point, and this is why we should be in agreement. Second point, against forced marriages. We had campaigns in Europe against forced marriages, and then when it comes to anything which has to do with reading the text, being able to come and to get a sense of autonomy for women, this is happening. So I would say that in some countries, you either has got, by definition, you can't be a free Muslim woman because the way you dress. I think it's wrong. Let the people decide and let them speak for themselves and listen. Listen, because sometimes they speak and they are not listening.
Tariq says that Muslim women in the 21st century also exercise equal rights in the country, just like any other women, and many campaigns are working on that. However, various cases today show that women are still restricted from engaging in various activities, which blatantly defies what Tariq endorses.
Douglas, I want to ask you, you heard some of the people from the floor there, the woman complaining about attacks on her because she's described as a scarfie, because she wears a head veil. I mean, that is something that you would regret. I mean, that doesn't promote social cohesion,
Nobody thinks that any physical attacks or any such thing could be a good thing to happen. Of course not. Of course, there are. Let's make sure we're right.
Talking about
prejudice exists in society. Let's just be absolutely clear, this is an audience. Prejudice undoubtedly exists in this society. It exists across racial groups, including from minorities to other minorities, after all, which is one of the things we see increasingly in Britain these days. And it is also the case that people, in particularly famously lower socioeconomic groups, are likely to feel hatred for other groups. That is one of the things that has to be tackled, and everyone, I think, in this hall, I'm sure, we're in agreement that that should be tackled. But do not mix up somebody, a thug, a racist, and so on, attacking somebody in a street with the right of Fleming and me to say what we see in the Quran, what we think of Muhammad, and maybe even asserting our right to say so.
Okay, all right, now...
Thank you. Well, first of all, just to pick up on a couple of people, particularly women, who've said about the terrific things that Islam gives women in terms of rights. The first thing is, yes, in 7th century Arabia, some of this was progressive. In 21st century Britain, it is not. And you have to make that fundamental admission that the Quran is not a document for women's rights in Europe in 2010. It is not. Secondly, why is it that only Islamic societies and mosques in this country are places which teach and preach hatred of other minorities? Every single week in this country, there are people on campuses who teach the murder of minorities. Last week, it was somebody who calls for the murder of apostates. The week before, at another university, it was somebody who believes the Jews are fair game. This is not tolerable. It is not tolerable for Muslims. It is not tolerable from anyone else. You, I hope, would agree with me that any minority that engaged in such hatred and bigotry should be criticized. Don't pretend that the cloak of Islam and Islamic belief and religious fervor means that people like us cannot say that people who call for the murder of minorities are not mainstream, are not acceptable, and have to be critiqued.
Douglas Murray made yet another sensational point, explaining how the Quran or any other Islamic religious text does not endorse women's rights that are applicable in the 21st century. He also highlights how extreme punishments are normalized in various Islamic countries, seeking their validation for such inhumane acts from the Quran. What are your opinions on this? Do you think the UK has let go of its Muslims, or is it the other way around? Let us know in the comments.